go a great deal of time without some bad thing happening, it's not because there's this magic force field. It's because nobody actually tried to do the bad.
And that image becomes and that image becomes less clear when you layer on top of that DEI.
This speaks to an idea that we discuss here on IRL a lot. The idea that the deep state, as much as it's doing nefarious bad things, the motivation is rarely nefarious and bad beyond,
of course,
I want to make a little extra money this year. I want to make sure that my job is here next year. I want to make sure that my kids can go to college. I want to make sure that my retirement is safe. The motivation isn't
the oldest motivation in history. Yeah. Look, we talked about religion a little bit, but it's greed.
Yeah.
It's one of the most fundamental things that human beings have is our flaws.
I think that it's probably functionally better to not even call it greed, as it's just people looking out for themselves the way that people do. Because even when you say greed, right, that brings to mind nefarious motivations, as this is a uniquely bad person.
Oh no, it's not unique at all.
It's not at all. It's just this. It's just people doing doing their job the most efficient way that they can to benefit them, not necessarily to benefit the final product at their job or to benefit the country. Yep. It's just, hey, how can I do my job, the job that I'm expected to do, the job that everybody around me also expects me to do, right? How can I do that in a way that is going to produce maximum benefit for me and for my family and for my kids, and actually, where it actually does the job that I'm supposed to do, right? Accomplishes the task that I'm supposed to be doing.
Add this to it, the myth of competency.
Sure.
A lot of people saw this in Butler, PA. For the first time, they realized that there was not an impenetrable force field around every single person that the Secret Service protected.
A lot of times,
I assure you,
when you go a great deal of time without some bad thing happening, it's not because there's this magic force field. It's because nobody actually tried to do the bad.
And that image becomes and that image becomes less clear when you layer on top of that DEI.
Of course, yeah.
So we saw that in New Orleans with the ASAC Duncan in New Orleans, who can barely speak coherent
sentence. That was the woman that specifically said this was not a terror attack.
Pacifically. It's pronounced like the ocean. Pacifically.
Yeah. I can't stop saying it now, by the way. It's the worst. People will be like, are you doing okay? And I'm like, well, I specifically told you that I was going to be fine. I woke up early this morning and I'm good.
So I actually have a friend of mine who worked with Duncan in the Miami field office. She tried out for SWAT, didn't pass it.
Mercifully.
Her first choice, or first, thing that she did after failing making SWAT was she was going to sue the SSA, the supervisory special agent in charge of the selection process. So she was talked off the ledge by her leadership command. But again, kind of like all press is good press, she became known as someone you don't stand in front of. Okay, so her career at that time, her failure actually, because of her threat to sue, actually all mountains were laid low, all valleys filled in, and here we go. She's off to New Orleans standing in front of a microphone at 6:36 in the morning and can't even speak a coherent sentence.
Let me throw another thing on there, because there's this idea, and DEI is a real problem in the FBI, although Chris Wray will not acknowledge it. They did a lawsuit that they settled, and I'm trying to see what the date was. Okay, so it sounds like the press release came out in September of last year. So pretty recently. And it was like almost a $23 million settlement with a bunch of women that were discriminated against at the FBI's academy at Quantico. Okay? Because there's this idea in the outside world, especially people on the political left and the political energy behind it, is that women are getting screwed over in law enforcement. They're not given a fair shake. I will affirmatively tell you that I knew two of the women that were in this lawsuit, and there weren't that many women in it. There were 34 women. I knew two of them. A friend of mine knew another one. Another friend knew two more. So we can account for 5 of them. They were so dangerous and so unprepared to be at the place that they were at that literally my wife would be better off. My wife has zero training except living around me with a gun. She would be better off. She's a better shot, and she was much safer with firearms than any of these characters were, because they were atrocious. Like, I watched women fail non-pass fail events. Imagine, you know what a familiarization is with a weapon? Mm-hmm. You just shoot a couple rounds and then you go away. You're not supposed to fail that. It's not supposed to be a failure. I give you a shotgun, pump the shotgun, fire some buckshot, pump it again, fire the buckshot, pump it, fire, a slug, and then give it back to the instructor.
Yeah.
The woman couldn't hold on to it. She fired it and it left her shoulder and it left her hands and it's in the air. They picked it up and gave it to her again, and she did it again to the point where they're like, we're not even going to finish the FAM. That's not even a pass-fail event, and you failed it. I watched women like that. They got paid out in this lawsuit. I watched a woman where there was a standard for a slalom course with cones. By the way, it's some of the most fun thing you can do is driving through cones with somebody else's car.
Yeah.
Like, bro, let's do that all day long. The driving course has like a 2-minute limit. The people that needed work on it were doing it in like 2.5, 2:45. I watched a woman do it in 16 minutes, and she hit more cones than there were counts for
Driving
penalties.
backwards?
There's some backwards driving, but she couldn't
Like
see
the
over
whole
the back.
thing,
She's sub 5 feet tall. She's from New York. She'd never driven a car before. And they allowed her to go and do the slalom course. And she eventually failed out, but she failed out in like the 18th week. And she was part of this lawsuit. Her name's Elena Parra. She's EP in the lawsuit. I'll just say it because I don't care. And she was atrocious. Here's the other crazy thing. You know what happened after she left the FBI as part of this? She got hired on by the Secret Service, and she made it through.
But it gets
This kind of stuff is like, it's wild. You file one lawsuit and you win. You threaten a lawsuit in the FBI's Miami field office and you get backed off the ledge, everybody gets out of your way. And they pay you out tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars of taxpayer money.
but it gets worse.
Well, wait, there's more.
So the plus up of the 45% of the FBI came with the Patriot Act. It's the Intel program. So there was a big discussion whether they're going to create an MI5 domestic intelligence program like the Brits have, standalone, and it was decided that we're going to lash it up to the FBI. Those 0132 job series, those intelligence analysts actually belong to the Director of National Intelligence, who's Avril Haines right now. Hopefully, Tulsi Gabbard will get that job going forward. The intelligence cadre is the engine because they drive integrated program management. They drive the stats. They do most of the violations, which Ray has testified on regarding abusing data warehouse and just looking for cases to make against U.S. citizens without predication. So in 2016, were you at the academy in 2016?
Yep.
Okay, so I was what's called a field counselor. So I was lashed up to a class of agents and analysts going through the FBI academy.
We actually met, but we didn't know it until years later.
And that Director Comey came for his regular lunch that he has with the field counselor. So there's a separate dining area off of the main dining facility at Quantico. And at the time, we were having a large turnover ratio of analysts coming into the bureau, a high turnover rate. And at the same time, the ones that were staying were beyond petulant and hard to deal with. The self-entitlement doesn't begin to cover their attitude. So it was my turn to ask a question. And I said, Director Comey, this is 2016. I said, after 15 years of war, we have thousands of intelligence professionals that have deployed into combat theaters of operation, worked in high-stress environments, in a team environment. And most of those people were enlisted, and they don't have college degrees. Director Comey, would you consider... I had already laid out about the turnover rate. I said, would you consider changing our policy of only recruiting out of top tier schools and allowing some of these high school graduates but experienced intelligence professionals to come into the Intel program and then set out milestones for them? So you get an associate's degree, you get your next promotion, you get your bachelor's degree.
And of course,
he never answered the question because his
answered.
posse of sycophants tore me to ribbons. There was blood on the wall. They destroyed me inside of 20 seconds.
Having the audacity to ask if experienced people could do
Trump,
the job.
yeah, could Trump. And we see what kind of people are coming out of the universities. We know who they are now that, with the protests going on with Hamas and Israel.
Yeah.
So we know who those people are. We know what they look like because we've seen their professors as well.
Yeah.
But this is the cadre. This is the fuel and the engine that drives that whole integrated program management. It's the Intel cadre. If you ever want to get the FBI back to a law enforcement organization, you need to end this domestic intelligence program completely.
Do you guys have a sense, considering that what you've talked about here? Do you have a sense that the incoming administration is going to be able to do anything about this, because I understand it's difficult to make changes in Washington, D.C., especially on the bureaucrat level. There are people that as soon as you fire someone, they're going to sue. And I've heard people articulate an idea that what's going to happen is you're going to have people get fired, they'll sue, and it'll have to go to the Supreme Court. And the question is going to be, does the executive, as in the president, does the president have the authority to fire people in the executive branch that are not doing their job? Do you think that there's going to be that the executive has the ability to make changes that are necessary, or people like Kash Patel, will they be able to, or is it going to have to take going through the court system all the way up to the Supreme Court and having the Supreme Court decide, which hopefully the makeup of the court would say, yes, the executive does have the authority to decide who does and does not work for them. But that's
There's
not guaranteed.
What's your
sense?
Parts of that. So Senator Adam Schiff from California already tried to cut Kash Patel off at the knees, recognizing that he plans on making some structural changes and pointing out that, we might not want to do that in view of this rise of Islamic terrorism now coming back to the United States. So they're already just laying out that narrative, like no structural changes, Kash. Furthermore, it would take Congress to do away with the domestic intelligence program. Now, could the executive branch do something to kind of zero that out in terms of allocation of resources and through the DNI? Yes, it could happen. But
it would only be about funding, and then an administration that supports the idea after Donald Trump or two administrations later would come back and say, these are still laws on the books, and we're just going to go ahead and start doing this again.
So consider this. George already told you where the cheat code is. The analysts that work for the FBI don't answer to the FBI. That's not the master. The master comes from the Office of Director of National Intelligence. So they are serving in a role and being paid by the FBI. Actually, we don't get paid by the FBI. You get paid by the Department of Agriculture. All my checks came in from Department of Ag through the National Finance Center. It's so weird.
Super secret.
It's super secret. And then you go and you're like, hey, I work for the FBI, and they're like, but your pay stub says the Department of Agriculture, and you're like, I know, and I can't get them to fix it.
You got to have a G19 clearance.
Apparently, you got to have fake clearances.
G19.
So listen, the people, they're getting paid by one organization. They are answering to another. We can fix that problem. Mm-hmm. Kash Patel can fix that problem. The answer is like, hey, Tulsi, hey, high five. I'm going to give you all of the analytical core that's been sitting here. And they can continue to co-locate. They just don't work for the FBI anymore. Let's remove that chunk. And as it stands right now, and I think George can validate this, because of that IPM, because of the way that they just do term papers, essentially an analyst in the FBI writes term papers for a living. What's their quota per year?
3. The DNI said they have to write 3 a year. It was while I was with the Bureau, they said, these other intelligence agencies are writing X number of products per year. You're not. Your analysts need to produce at least 3 per year of what's called finished intelligence products.
This is analysis of raw intel in a way that means something to somebody. Okay? Is a domain awareness program, is that, if you wrote a domain awareness bulletin, is that finished?
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
Okay, so the thing that I came forward with that showed that they were targeting Catholics in Richmond, Virginia, that's one. So it's a long form term paper with a bunch of different little footnotes in it. It has some sourcing, which should be better than the Southern Poverty Law Center, but in that case, it was not. And so you show all the things. It should be better than the Atlantic, but it was not. So they write up this long term paper. That's one of 3. If you get 3 in the year, then you're going to be green in that metric. So you're good to go as an intel analyst. Well, you can write term papers for somebody else, because as an FBI agent, when I was doing that job, I didn't need your term paper. It never did anything for a case I worked. Not one. Ever. It didn't predicate a case. It didn't give me an idea of what my subjects were involved in. It's non-investigative work. It's analytical work. So get rid of those people. The second problem is the executives. And the question is, can we fire them outright, and can you do something with them? And without giving away a lot of strategy, because I have some ideas for people and I've shared some of them, right? Sure. What you do is you find some people that have done objectively wrong things and violated either federal policy or law that the agency holds them accountable to. And you hold them accountable to that. Some of that means prosecution. Some of it means removal from your job. You suspend them immediately. You investigate them, give them the opportunity to resign or to retire, which a lot of them will. And then they're going to be outside the agency's purview. Now you have some spots in some places in the country. And J. Edgar Hoover was really good at doing this back in the day. He was kind of a gangster. Not kind of, really. He was a gangster. So, like, he was known to dress like cross-dress. That was like a well-known thing about J. Edgar Hoover. So people get upset about it, and you look at it and be like, no, the guy dressed up in women's clothing, moved around in the space. It is what it is. So, long and short of it is, historically, that was a thing. I also think it's kind of funny. He was like the first LGBTQIA plus guy in the government, and he used to hunt them. He was a trendsetter. So before his time. Long and short of it is, you had this moment that what he would do is he would get rid of people that he thought were disrespecting the Bureau, that caused problems. And he would move them to places like Alaska. He would move them to Montana. He would move them to wherever they wanted to go.
Sounds like good.
Those are places we want to go. He would move them to places that they shouldn't be in. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so they would go, oh, I want to move to, Miami. And he was like, cool. Like, looks like you're going to South Dakota. And so he would send them out there to places they didn't want to be. And then they would go, well, rather than take that move, I'm going to resign. And that is an opportunity to not have to pay a bunch of lawsuits.
Yeah.
Because why would you want to pay a bunch of lawsuits if you don't have to? You just give people an opportunity to make the right decision for the country and for the organization.
And that's something that I've heard. I'm not sure actually who was touting the idea, but getting the bureaucracies out of Washington, D.C. instead of having them all.
You should totally decentralize it.
You should have the Department of Agriculture should be, based in Iowa or based in Nebraska, in Lincoln or something like that, right?
They hire people that live inside the D.C. Beltway who have D.C. Beltway attitudes.
Yep.
And that group of people is pretty small. And they mostly haven't experienced America.
Yeah.
Broadly speaking.
Yeah.
Like if you look around and you don't know where your food comes from because you live in Jersey, and maybe there's some food in Jersey, but not enough. If you live in New York City and it comes from the grocery store or a bodega and you have no idea, people in Washington, D.C. oftentimes have zero clue how the rest of America operates.
And another,
it's really, really different.
Another point to that is I think D.C. went 94% for Kamala Harris.
Correct.
And so if you've got that kind of, ubiquitous political opinion.
It's institutional capture.
And someone that honestly, any honest, objective estimation of the ability of Kamala Harris would lead you to say, no, she cannot do the job. She's not qualified to be the executive.
Let me pin that down even weirder, okay? Because people have been attacking Kash Patel's credentials.
He's got history working with the FBI, doesn't he?
Okay, but what was the big deal about Kamala Harris? She was a prosecutor.
Yeah.
She was a prosecutor, and therefore she knew how to be the president of the United States.
Which is a ridiculous assertion.
Kash Patel was a defense attorney, and he worked as a public defender. And then he was a prosecutor at the federal level. And then he was a chief of staff over to the, in the DOD. Mm-hmm. So he's worked all kinds of things. He has more experience in the federal government than Kamala Harris did when it comes to the capabilities of it. She was a senator for not even the full term.
Yep.
We look at people and you say, and then how about this? How come nobody on the left is excited about the first brown guy who happens to be a former public defender? Isn't that what you would want if you were a leftist, if you were really into this thing that we need to have diversity of opinion and skin color and things like that?
Clarence Thomas.
It's just so simple.
Exactly.
It's like when your politics don't align with what the ideology is, then you no longer count as that person. You're no longer a score point for us.
I mean,
we do this all the time.
The left, unquestionably, the left has only the politics in mind, and they use any of the excuses that they have, whether it be this person's of this identity or whatever. Those things only matter if they have the right ideology, and it's an excuse and an arguing point. Right. But the substance of that doesn't matter, because if it's a person that has the correct skin color or the correct gender or the correct ideological alignment, or I'm sorry,
orientation,
it doesn't matter if they don't have the correct ideological alignment. So that is a clear refutation of the argument that they make, and I think
they can't even stand on it, and they don't try to. Here's the biggest simple thing. At the end of the day, a lot of Americans want to see something that I would call retribution. Would that be accurate?
I mean, yes.
People want to see retribution.
Payback.
But in reality, you can't do that at the federal government level. So what you can hope for and what you should ask for is accountability. And that's different. That means if you broke the law, if you violated policy, then you have to go because you didn't meet the terms of the condition of your employment. And you can do that without a lot of problems. And you should. But you shouldn't go after and just go, we're going to swipe out huge swaths of people, even if it feels good. That's bad for America to go through that court system battle up to the Supreme Court and decide whether or not the president can do this. It's not going to be effective immediately. It's going to tie up a bunch of stuff in lawsuits. You're going to have a bunch of attorneys doing this. It's far better to say that these people violated in a narrow subset. These are people that can no longer work here. And then you create an opening to do some other things. And you give people opportunities, I'm using words very carefully, to choose to no longer to self-separate.
Yep.
And that's better for America. It's better for the accountability versus the retribution end of it. And like I said, it is historically something that has been used by people like the FBI. When you have 55 field offices across the country, there are some that people don't want to go to. I'm just telling you, there are some that are high on the list and there are some that are very low on the list. And everybody supposedly wants to move to, where do they all want to move? They all want to move to Charlotte because of the cost of living and because of the temperature and what you can buy in housing. And nobody wants to go live in New York, and a lot of people don't want to go live in parts of Montana. But like, you'd be surprised now, people like Salt Lake City, very, very coveted. Wait list until you're dead.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Culture War podcast. We're live every Friday, 10 a.m. to noon. So subscribe and come hang out.